Well, welcome everyone. My name is Penelope Moon, and I direct the Center for Teaching and Learning here on the Seattle campus of the University of Washington. I also co-lead the Teaching at UW Network, which is a tri-campus collaboration that focuses on offering high-quality instructional support to instructors, regardless of what UW campus they're on. Today's session is part of a series of events we're hosting this year to help broaden and deepen understanding of the new core elements of effective teaching, which the UW faculty voted to adopt into the faculty code last spring. Many of you are already aware of these elements. Many of you practice these elements. But I do want to take a moment to introduce and review them for those of you who are less familiar with them before we get to our wonderful panelists. So I'm going to actually share my screen of the core elements page, but let me first post the link to this page in the chat, and then I'll share my screen. If I can find the share screen button. Oh, maybe I can't share my screen. Oh, there it is. Got it. This is a page developed by the Teaching at UW Network to give you easy access to the 5 core elements. It contains information that's also available in the faculty code. And we do have a link to the faculty code there. So if you want to read a badly formatted version of the 5 core elements, I invite you to go to the faculty code. But we've cleaned it up a bit here. And I actually am going to get my script out so I make sure I make all the points I want to make here. As you can see, there's 5 core elements, and these elements are backed by decades of research and are also already practiced by tons of UW faculty. They emerged from a more than 2-year effort, a collaborative effort that brought together faculty senate councils, the Future of Teaching and Learning Initiative core group, and involved deep consultation with hundreds of faculty and academic professionals at both the UW and at peer institutions across the United States. As I said, we're hosting a number of events this year. We've actually got 5 of them. Each one of these 5 events focuses on one of these new core elements of effective teaching. In autumn, we explored the first 2 elements that you can see on this list, the element of alignment and the element of inclusive and equitable teaching. And today's session is going to focus on the 3rd element, active and engaged teaching. And this element reads, effective teaching creates opportunities for learners to critically engage ideas and each other. And I will put that in chat in just a minute. Research shows that when it is incorporated intentionally, active learning has positive impacts on student learning and success, particularly from students from underrepresented and historically marginalized groups. On top of that, engaging students through active learning also has the potential to increase instructional efficiency, because when students are engaged in learning inside of class, when they are actively engaged in creating knowledge, they are less likely to seek supplemental help outside the classroom. At the end of the session, I'm going to share an additional web page where you can drill down into active and engaged teaching techniques. It's actually linked here on the core elements page, but we're not going to go there yet. Before we get there, and let me stop sharing my screen. Before we get there, I want to introduce our panelists and move into our panel discussion. I'm very pleased to have 2 terrific faculty members with us today. Jose Guzman is Associate Teaching Professor in the School of Aquatic and Fishery Sciences and Marine Biology in the College of the Environment here on the Seattle campus. And Pamela Crane-Buell is Associate Professor in the Department of Culture, Arts, and Communication in the School of Interdisciplinary Arts and Sciences on the Tacoma campus of the University of Washington. And I'm just tickled that they're both here today. Okay, so we're going to talk about 2 questions. They're big questions. And the first question is, can you talk about how you create and foster active and engaged classes? And I think we'll start with Pamela.
Hello, everyone. First, thank you for having me. Thank you, Penn. Thank you, everybody. Just a small warning, I have a cold right now, so I apologize for any coughs or sniffles that enter my discussion. Thank you for your understanding. So in my classes, I should preface this with I teach primarily film and media studies courses, so I'm a humanist. We deal with texts a lot in my classes, lots of reading, lots of discussion. So most of what I'm going to say here will apply broadly across the humanities with different types of texts and discussion, but I think can also be modified for the social sciences and sometimes even the sciences, and I'm happy to talk about what those modifications can look like. But basically, my major approach is to break up lecture and the famous like open-ended discussion led by crickets, right? With guided activities in class to make sure that students are able to, yes, engage the material and each other as per the definition of active and engaged learning, but also give them low stakes opportunities to explore what that actually looks like before we're doing high stakes assessment. And it also breaks up class so that students aren't just sitting there kind of like eyes glazed over, maybe staring at me, maybe staring at their phones for, an hour and a half or more. So I have kind of four top strategies that I'll share with y'all, and we can, obviously ask any questions you want in the Q&A. So strategy number one that I highly recommend is directed small group discussion. A lot of folks probably do this, but there are a lot of small tweaks you can make to ensure that it's more effective than open-ended discussion. I found that specific guiding questions are really helpful and some form of accountability at the end of the discussion. So sometimes I will ask groups to assign a scribe. So choose a scribe, someone who will write down a summary of what everyone discussed and then either submit that on Canvas for a quick like credit, no credit, or be responsible for reporting out to the whole group. And we do go to each group and expect their report out. This like tiny little deliverable at the end makes it feel like they actually have to have something to say rather than just kind of sit there and look at each other awkwardly. So that's one way to make sure that it's active and engaged. Another thing I use, even though it feels very elementary school, is worksheets. Yes, I still use worksheets, paper worksheets. And this can work differently depending on the type of class. Obviously, if you're teaching online, they're not going to be paper, but I essentially formulate these to guide students through aspects of the course that might otherwise be really overwhelming or difficult or encourage disengagement. So I teach film and media studies. This means students have to sit through a film for 2 hours, and it's not necessarily the type of film they would choose for themselves, right? So to avoid like distraction, secret pulling out of the phone, etc., I assign worksheets that they fill out during the screening, and I'm happy to show those in a moment. And in fact, I might share my screen with you and show you what they look like. Students have to fill out the worksheet as they go, answer questions about the film as they go. Another version of this that I use is a like sort of texts analysis worksheet, especially in that like sort of mid-level course, like your high 200, your low 300, when students are still getting used to taking responsibility for really close textual analysis. A worksheet might guide them through finding the argument in the text, finding the way it's supported, finding the key points, relating those to other concepts we've talked about in lecture, etc. And these are great because they double as study guides. If you're going to have an exam of some sort or a presentation of some sort later, students can hold on to that worksheet as a reminder of what they learned. Um, in terms of submission, if you're not someone who wants to deal with a whole bunch of sheets of paper, I often ask students to snap a photo and submit that to Canvas so that you still have the, smooth digital grading experience that you might otherwise, enjoy on Canvas rather than a huge stack of papers. Or you could be old school and take the huge stack of papers. So small group discussion, worksheets. The third one is class debates. This is a great way to get them working together on something. It works best in smaller classes, but I've also done it in large classes. I basically do a loosely courtroom style debate where there's opening and closing arguments and, exhibit A, B, C of their evidence. And the evidence has to be from the texts that we're using. So whether that's written texts or visual texts, that's kind of how they cobble together their arguments. I will often give, again, a prompt at the beginning, so it's sort of a more guided debate. Um, but it works really well to get them working again together towards a common goal rather than just kind of getting lost in the text. So finding those pieces of evidence I find works well. And then the final strategy that I use most often is some version of case study analysis. Again, this is something a lot of you probably already do, but a few tweaks make it even more active and engaged than you might otherwise find. And part of this is, again, direction. So not just analyze this case study and tell me how it fits into whatever we've been learning, especially at the lower division, asking very specific questions. And again, including some kind of accountability in that. So maybe they'll turn in their answers. Maybe each group takes a turn sharing an answer. And this is something that if you have crickets in a general discussion, you can ground it in. So for me, it's a clip from the film that we've watched or one of the films that we're discussing. And we're digging in with really close analysis into that case study, which makes them more capable to apply the concepts, right? Or of applying the concepts that you have been trying so hard to teach them. So just that chance at application, working together to apply the concepts into something physical that you either show or hand out or tell them about. Sometimes this might mean bringing in community partners with a real case study, right? Depending on what you're teaching. I find that these are all really effective. So those are my big four. I think before I hand it off to Jose, I will just briefly show you what these look like if you need a little bit of inspiration. So I'll share my screen. This is for a sort of lower level introduction to film course. This is one of my worksheets. As you can see, it's about cinematography. And basically, as students watch the 1989 film Do the Right Thing, they are learning how to identify different techniques within cinematography, and they are writing those down in each category, right? So that's as they're watching the film. And then on the back side, I have some, larger like tying concepts together questions that they fill out immediately after completing the film to allow them to sort of process it. And again, I have them turn this in by taking a picture a lot of the time so that they can hold on to this and use it for exam prep later on. So this is what I mean by that kind of worksheet. I can show you a slightly more advanced worksheet for a text-heavy class. So this is a class about the Hollywood musical that I teach. So it's a genre course, a higher division class. And it asks students to bring together 3 different authors. All of them are talking about the Busby Berkeley musical of the 1930s, but they have slightly different arguments and approaches, of course. So the boxes kind of guide students through finding those arguments, thinking about the aspects of the arguments. So again, they don't feel overwhelmed and lost by these dense academic texts. On the back side, it's sort of a wrap up of the unit, which I often tie into my worksheets where they had to watch a film on their own, and now they have to apply what we've been talking about to the film that they watched so that they can see how their film fits into the larger discussion we've been having. So that's what my worksheets look like. Hopefully they're inspiring. Maybe they're not, but that's what those are. And then the last thing I'll show you is one of those sort of deliverables of in-class activities. So this is my Canvas page for my global music video course that I'm currently teaching. One of the activities we did is learning how setting and color do a lot of the work in music videos in terms of constructing their meaning. And so for this particular activity, I got the groups together and asked them to watch one of 3 videos that are not in English so that they can't use the lyrics to help them, and just analyze together these little case studies of how color and setting are working. A couple of key questions there that they discuss, and then they enter them into a Canvas quiz. Not really a quiz, but they enter it into a quiz and submit it so that I have, proof that they worked on this together and had this discussion, and I can give them credit for it. So I will stop my share. Hopefully, that quick and dirty tour through some of my tools is helpful to folks, and happy to answer anything in the Q&A. I'll hand it over to Jose.
Thank you. Well, I just wanted to say thank you. I mean, one of my takeaways from that is not just saying, okay, go discuss, right? Like you're giving them prompts, you're helping guide them through a certain process. And worksheets, yeah, it doesn't have to be super sexy and like bleeding edge. Like these things work, right? So thank you for sharing that. Jose, how would you answer the question?
Okay, first of all, I'm a huge fan of worksheets, I gotta say. So the question how I create and foster active and engaged classes. When I think about creating an active and engaging class, I always start with this simple idea. You cannot expect students to be active and engaged if you are not active and engaged yourself. So if I walk into a class and deliver a 15-minute lecture with 50 PowerPoint slides, that is exhausting and that is boring for me. And it is definitely exhausting and boring for my students. Energy is contagious. So if in class I am present, I'm engaged, enthusiastic and curious, that transfer to the room. But to me, engagement actually alone is not enough. I don't want just my students to be busy. I want my teaching to also be effective. So to me, effective teaching means that students can use tools I give them to solve problems that they've never seen before. And very, very importantly, in that process, they are not afraid of failing because I create an environment where productive struggle is normal and safe. Okay, so now here's the thing. What's the secret recipe for an active, engaging, and effective learning environment? And I'm going to be very specific. And I use 3 secret ingredients. The first one is I make my students talk. The more they talk, the more they learn. There's no more around that. When a student articulate their thinking, when they explain their reasoning, when they respond to peers, something very powerful happens. They refine their ideas, they challenge their assumptions, and that's actually where the real learning lives. Not in me talking, but in them thinking out loud. The second secret ingredient is use intentional participation strategies. In my case, I use random call, and I learn my students' names. Even in large classes, and I teach up to 300 students, I make a top priority to learn my students' names. There's something super powerful about student knowing that you know who they are, and it communicates that they matter. Random call keeps everybody intellectually present in the room. And anyone can actually be invited to participate in the conversation at any given time. If they know the answer, awesome. If they don't know the answer and want to pass, fantastic. The goal in my class, the random call, is not to catch them, but to keep everybody thinking. So make your students talk, use random call. And the third one is be very, very intentional about the complexity of your question. You can use the Bloom's taxonomy as a guide. The Bloom's taxonomy is just a fancy framework that we use to classify learning objectives by cognitive complexity. So I'm constantly asking myself, am I asking my students to recall information, to regurgitate information, or am I asking them to apply, to analyze, and to create? If I want my students to do high-level thinking, I help them to scaffold that, and I practice that with them in class. So when students feel ownership over complex and relevant questions, engagement comes naturally. So together, all these 3 ideas of make your students talk, the more they talk, the more they learn, use random call, learn their names, be aware of the taxonomy. All these strategies create a classroom where students are intellectually active rather than passively receiving information, and where engagement actually is leading to real learning.
Thank you, Jose. I actually, we didn't plan on this question, but I like to keep it real and keep folks on their toes. You mentioned that you teach large enrollment classes once in a while.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things we hear, I know one of the things we hear quite often is like, oh, I can't do active learning because my class is really big. Can you just expand on a little bit of what are there particularly challenges of doing active learning in large classroom? Have you overcome those?
It's great and it's fun and it's doable. And if you don't know how to do active learning or how active learning looks in a large classroom, go and see someone doing active learning in a classroom. Making your student talk, the more they talk, the more they learn. It doesn't matter if you have 15 or 500 students in a classroom. Talk to people you have around and discuss this question. You may learn, like me, I'm just a crazy person, and I study my students' names, and I praise that I know most of their names, right? I learn 20 names every day, and I randomly throw those names in the classroom. Students are like, oh, does he know our names? So it works. And just use random call in the class and thinking about what type of question you're asking. So active learning is super doable in a 300 student class. In an 800 student class, go and see Biology 180. That's exactly what they do. Think per share, random call. And it's actually very, very, very fun. Really fun, really.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah. One of the things that whenever we're thinking about what examples to share with faculty about active learning, the first thing that my team usually comes up with is like, oh, think, pair, share. And we're like, oh, do we really want to say think, pair, share again? But it really works. Like it's a low effort way to build active learning into regardless of how big your class is.
Yeah. And actually it's just like a very useful, the think per share, because first when they think about a question, you are mimicking what may happen in the exam, right? So you pose a question, a hard one, students sit and think and either sketch or draw or answer or use a polar question and answer. And there is the share, right? The share when they put into words what they think, when they get challenged by their peers, when they are, when they start reconsidering what they think. And that is perfect because that is a piece necessary before you do the random call. Because now I'll say, hey folks, oh Penn, how are you today? What do you guys were talking about, right? So I never say, what do you think about this question? You Penn, you will maybe freaking out, and I'll say, well, what's the conversation going on? And you'll say, oh yeah, I was talking to Pam, I was talking to Nathan, and dilutes that responsibility a lot. So it is super fun. If they know the answer, great. If they don't know the answer, I will say, okay, I work with them on the right answer. Sometimes they pass. If they pass, I'll say, okay, Pam, who do you want to throw under the bus today? And Pam will say, Nathan. I'll say, okay, Nathan, dude, I'm sorry. You can make this fun and dynamic and still keeping the purpose of the random call.
That the random call, I think, builds on something that Pamela said, like having that deliverable. Like, I mean, we can talk about it in terms of accountability, but it also motivates them. It gets them producing something. So that random call, in a way, functions as a deliverable.
It is, and actually, it is part of it serves one of the learning goals in my class, which is to make students feel comfortable talking out loud in public. Because at the end of the day, in 3 or 4 years from now, they're going to be on tables taking decisions on blank, where money goes, if they're going to get a grant, if they're going to apply to grad school, they're going to enter. So they need to start getting comfortable in an uncomfortable context.
Great. Well, thank you both for sharing your strategies. Our second question. So when we were working with the Faculty Senate Councils and the Future of Teaching and Learning Initiative, we had drafted the core elements, and then we we talked with tons of people. We went around to most of the schools and colleges, many departments. And one of the things we heard some trepidation about is like, how am I going to demonstrate all of these things in my when I go up for promotion or when I go up for tenure or in a teaching evaluation? So that's the second question. How have you demonstrated, or how do you plan to demonstrate this element of active and engaged teaching in, say, an annual evaluation or promotion and tenure scenario? And I think we're going to start with Jose here.
Yeah, thank you. So when I think about demonstrating my teaching, and that is both when I talk with my peers, when I talk to the director of my department, definitely when I submitted my promotion package a few years ago, I start with one fundamental step, which is I define what success means for me. For me, success means that students can use tools I give them to solve problems that they've never seen before, and they're not afraid of failing, right? Because again, I create, and I put a lot of effort on that, on creating an environment where struggle is normal and is safe. Once that definition is clear, the next step is being very reflective and systematic. I evaluate whether what I'm doing in the classroom actually leads to that outcome. I use both formative and summative assessments to measure that. And of course, I adapt my teaching based on the evidence gathered. And all that needs to be reflected in your promotion package. But something that is very important, and that is both true when you talk informally with the director of your department, with your peers, again, in a promotion context, to not keep things too high level and be very specific of what you do and provide examples, right? So I want you to provide some examples that I presented in my promotion package. Let me see if I can share my screen. Share screen. Can you see that? Thumbs up? Okay, awesome. So the first thing is what do I do in my classroom that leads to my goal? And I use a flipped classroom model. And I clearly explained how my courses are structured, what happened before class, what happens during class, and what happens after class, and how the elements in each of the stage aligns with my goal. Again, I want my students to use the tools and the knowledge that I give them to solve problems that they've never seen before, and they're not afraid of failing. So in the pre-class, let me see here, in the pre-class phase is where the instructional content is delivered. This is a snapshot of my Canvas. In that, I state the learning goals is what you need to know at the end of the session. I provide readings. We use a textbook. I make short video lectures, like 5 to 10 minutes. And students after that, they have to go through that before they come to class. That's what happened before coming to class. And after they complete all that, what they do is they take a quick quiz just to check. It's mostly for them to know that, they know the basics, to have a conversation the next day when I'm meeting with them, right? And now we have what happens during class. And during class, that's when the magic happens, right? So that's when we can focus on higher order thinking. I use a lot of poll everywhere questions. I use a lot of small group discussions. I use a lot of sketching and drawing. This is a class with 300 students. A lot of sketching and drawing, and all that allows me to meet students where they are after they went through the reading and watched the videos and elevate their competency. So during that process, students first, and we're talking about earlier, first they work individually, pretending that or they are in an exam, right? The same setting, challenging question, they think individually, and then in groups. Make your students talk. So they talk in groups. And then I randomly call them, random call, right? To explain the reasoning. And this structure actually allows students a lot to build their confidence before speaking publicly. They have a chance to bounce ideas with their peers. And that to me feels like we're warming up, right? So I'm gonna meet you where they are. We're gonna elevate the complexity of this. We're warming up to a real life, relevant, and complex case study. And we have more complex case studies here, right? So students now get to practice applying their knowledge, and they get to practice applying the tools that I gave them to answer a question that they've never seen before. So I am very, very aware of the Bloom's taxonomy, of the complexity of my questions. Let's meet where you are, let's elevate your competency, and then let's apply. And that is what happens in the classroom. Happy to answer questions. This is my favorite part of my work, interacting with my students. And now there is what happens after class. And I do a lot of things after class. I'm gonna show you one activity that I love because it was very fun to come up with, because it's very effective. And this is a case study challenge. So for the case study challenge, I have a library with 25 scientists that I contacted them and I said, okay, can you tell me a little bit about who you are, where you come from, what you do for research, and I want you to create a case study for my students. So what they do is they talk about their research, and very often they give a little data set or a question that is part of the research portfolio, right? And then my students need to work on that answer. All these are asynchronous videos that I have this library, and I use them regularly with them. So this is very fun for three things. The first one is because all those people are my friends. So people that I met in grad school, my undergraduate peers from 200 years ago, people that I did my postdoc with, they are really fun to work with. But then they're talking about the research. They're talking about career paths. They're talking about what they do and what is challenging for them. And what is really cool is they're using a vocabulary, they're using terms, they're using expressions and content that my students are actually seeing in class. So for the first time, they're realizing that what they are learning is actually used by the scientific community in their regular life. So that is the first idea that, oh my God, this is cool what I'm doing. And then because I'm really interested in them applying what they are doing, they get to apply their own knowledge and tools to a completely different context, right? They get to apply it to new context. So that is really cool, super fun, works great. It took me a couple of years to build up the library, but it's on point. Okay, so that's what let me stop sharing this. So this is what I do in my class, pre-class, post-class. And what is very important as well is how I do evaluate my teaching, because at the end of the day, that's what you need to present to a committee, right? So I show how this structure improves student performance on high order exam questions, more complex questions. Because my classes very often have a component of student-led labs. I also encourage my students to present their research to the undergraduate research symposium. You guys, that's out there. Take advantage of that. I also detail changes that I made based on students' feedback. And very, very often what I do after I have either a mid-quarter evaluation or a final evaluation after the quarter, I run some qualitative assessment to see and target seeing how these assignments have boosted the confidence and intellectual engagement of my students. So in very, very short and in brief, I demonstrate the quality of my teaching, not just by describing what I do, but by documenting the alignment between the goals, the activities, and the assessment outcomes. And ultimately providing evidence that my students are becoming more capable and confident thinkers over time, which ultimately, that is my goal as an instructor.
Thank you, Jose. I loved those slides, and I love that you kind of refer to them as reflective documentation. Like what we talk about providing annotated examples of what you do, same thing. But I love the kind of thinking more about it as a reflective document. So thank you for sharing that. Pamela, what about you? How do you demonstrate, or would you demonstrate that you engage in active and engaged teaching in a promotion and tenure or annual review process?
Well, having just recently gone through the tenure process, I am ready for this question. So I have three main things that I do either annually or like when it's time to go up for promotion that help to highlight this work. Because I'm in the humanities, it's a little bit harder to have like demonstrated proof of, like additional achievement because everything is so squishy and there aren't as many numbers. But the good news about being in the humanities is that we can do more holistic work. So the first thing I do is, in my tenure narrative, I had specific subsections in teaching about my pedagogical practices, which included specific examples. As Jose mentioned, specific examples are key. And I also had a section on pedagogical development where I demonstrated the work that I have done to improve. And you can list, for example, trainings like this one or workshops or what have you, and then explain how that changed what you do in the classroom. So I lay it out pretty clearly in the documentation. The second thing I do is when I have my collegial teaching observations done, in the sort of pre-meeting with my peer, ask them to specifically look at the effectiveness of whatever active learning tools I'm using. And to like consider for themselves from their own perspective, oh, these students are more engaged than my students, or these students really seemed to be like applying those concepts to the material without additional prompting or whatever it is, then that ends up in their letter that goes into my file. So what happens is there's a nice little corroboration between what I'm saying about myself in my narrative and then what my observers observed about me and my use of active learning in the classroom. So that's the second thing. The third thing, and this one I think is really, really great, is I publish some of my tools. So if you're someone who is developing a new tool or a new approach or a new strategy in your specific field, there is often an entire body of scholarship of teaching and learning in your field or your discipline where you can publish that work for your peers so that you are like documented as someone who has developed such things. For example, the first version of the screening sheet that you saw about cinematography is part of a whole set of screening sheets that I created for Introduction to Film Studies that I published in. Basically, there's the University Film and Video Association has an offshoot that's called Edit Media, which stands for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion in Teaching Media. And I published those tools there to explain both how they contribute to active learning, but also how they help level the playing field for students who are less exposed to cinematic analysis. Some students actually take film studies in high school now, which is mind-blowing to me. I did not have that experience, but plenty of students show up to my classroom having never had to examine a film, and they have no idea what I'm talking about when I ask them to take notes on a film. So the screening sheet is a way to level that playing field, for example. So yeah, publishing in the scholarship of teaching and learning in your field helps to establish you as someone who is actively thinking about pedagogy and its effectiveness. And so that is yet one more way to document what you're doing. But yeah, I want to echo everything Jose said about being specific in your materials, naming things, annotating things, including them as appendices. If you have worksheets, if you have any kind of physical evidence of what you've done, including students reflecting on how effective it is for them. I do also ask students either at the midterm or at the end of class, and this is separate from the official teaching evaluations, to reflect on their learning. And I ask them very specific questions about what helped their learning and how. And that's another piece of evidence that you can marshal. So thinking about it really in terms of how you can demonstrate with evidence, even if the evidence is a little squishy, like ours is in the humanities, what you've done. And it's great if those things can corroborate each other in your files. So yeah, that's what I do.
Great. One of the things I love about what you said is that it's you are not shy about talking about how you've tried and tried again, how you've iterated. And that's actually a key kind of cultural shift that are embedded in the core elements. Like the groups that worked on these core elements when the faculty voted them into the code, you know, they people that were working in that understood that you never become a master teacher, like you never stop learning how to teach. And so what we would hope that folks that were looking at collegial evaluations and annual reviews and things like that was evidence that someone is trying and trying again. Because the reality, and maybe it's not been your realities, but there have been times when I've implemented active learning where it hasn't gone as smoothly as it might have gone. And students had thoughts, right? And then you iterate and you try again. And that's the process of teaching. And what worked one quarter with a particular group of students, what worked really well might not actually work really well the next quarter. And you just have to keep trying. Do either of you have thoughts about what I just said? They want to jump in.
About failing?
Yes,
Yeah,
about failing
yeah,
one day and trying
yeah.
again.
Like trying a new thing in the classroom that doesn't work. Yeah, absolutely, all the time. And that's fine because there's that part of the reflection afterwards where you fail and you are like, what went wrong? What can I do next time? And keep trying. There's very important to keep trying. You think that we're using active learning, you are using a model that has been proven right by scientific evidence. So you're doing something that is beneficial for the student. You just need to adapt that style to what your style of teaching is. But I want to, something that to me was very, very impactful when I started doing active learning and evidence-based teaching. I did not start from zero because I went and saw people do active learning in the classroom. And I met with them afterwards. And people that do active learning, and I'm there, they're always happy to talk about active learning in the classroom. They're always happy to talk about how they engage with the student, what are the struggles, what are the things that are working, what are the fun things, because at the end of the day, we're people that love teaching.
One thing I'll add to Penn in regards to your question is that I have still a certain subset of students who don't want to be active or engaged.
Oh, yeah.
They want you to lecture at them and they want to just like record down whatever you have to say. They want the banking model, right? They want the thing that we're told that we shouldn't do. And that's okay. I am still met with resistance when I do, especially the even more active activities. So in my intro to film class, I also force them to go make like 2 minute long films on their phones that use some of the, terms that we're learning. And they're like, "Ah, I have to get up out of my seat and like leave the classroom and like go work with, they don't want to do it. But, like I'm willing to put up with that percentage of students who just are really uncomfortable about it and maybe never get comfortable with it because I know that they and everyone else are ultimately benefiting. So yes, don't operate under the illusion that those of us who have been doing this even for a long time have like perfectly happy students who love everything that we do. Yeah, no, no, that's like the cost of pushing them a little bit past their comfort zone.
Mhm.
Yeah, I want to add to that the students don't need to like that. We do it because it's effective. That's it. So you don't need to love your medicine in order to take it.
Yeah. There's a difference between what students maybe want and what students need. And explaining that in a promotion and tenure package is important. Like, hey, the feedback that I got from students on this was really mixed. And this is why, because the research actually shows that, say, group work. Students largely hate group work. They say they want lecture, but what the research shows is that they perform better when we do active learning. So
Explain that to the promotion package committee and also explain that to your students.
mhm. Right, exactly. Yes. I want to just say thank you, Jose and Pamela, and thanks to our captioner. This was awesome. Have a good rest of your day.